The question is, who is the primary victim of war, men or women? The question does not give you an option of saying everyone. So if you had to choose one, which do you choose?
You know what? It's the men because of the traumas that they are stuck with after all that, even if they live.
Wait, so going to you, World War I, who's the primary victim of World War I for you? How do we do that works?
I guess I would say.
You said woman.
I don't know.
To the
I guess
general
I guess I would still say to women.
Okay.
Women
What about World War II?
Woman.
Vietnam?
I would just say women all around.
The Ukraine War?
Yeah.
Well,
even Palestine,
Ukraine was very
Israel.
modern, and I have some information on the Ukraine war.
Okay, but before you say that, can you say women?
Women.
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 Yeah, instead of woman.
Women.
You keep on
Women.
saying woman as
Women.
plural, like women.
Women.
Women in here.
Women. Yeah,
Women.
Women.
All right.
It's my Spanish. And
So, let me ask you just one more time. So in the
Oh,
Ukraine,
no. It's not your Spanish. Hang on. We have plural in Spanish too for mujer, right? We know what plural is in Spanish too, right?
yes, Andrew, you're right.
All right.
okay, so I'm trying to wrap this up here.
Why
So
cigarettes? I gotta ask.
hold on, no, hold on. Okay, so
What's wrong with cigarettes? You,
What?
know, you start smoking. Helps with the brain.
No, it doesn't.
actually, I saw this video. Actually, people who smoke cigarettes, it actually does. You know,
Stop it.
that.
Don't even.
It's
don't
true.
Even. Just stop.
Maybe nicotine, if
The
anything.
nicotine-
Well, yeah, the nicotine. That's.
Anyways,
But
okay.
just like
Yep.
not the tobacco.
So, Ukraine war. Who's the primary victim of the Ukraine war, men or women?
I still believe women.
Okay, so Nick, could you pull up that photo? Do you know which one? Make sure it's the blurred one. Do you know what I'm talking about, Nick? Okay, so and there's also news articles. You can fact check me on this. But so when the Ukraine war broke out, all the men had to stay in the country. Like they could not leave. So from the age of 18 to it was either 60, 65, they had to remain in the country.
Right.
All the women of any age could flee the country. Oh wait, hold on, Nick. All the women could flee the country.
Okay.
So evade the war. They couldn't be drafted into the war. They could leave. So all the men could stay. Maybe not all the men had to get involved in the war effort, but a lot did. A lot got drafted. The women could go off to Romania. They could go off to London. They could go to Stockholm. They could be up in the club doing all this shit. Pull up the photo, Nick. So, on the left, you have Ukrainian women who were screenshotted on, I believe it's primarily Tinder, a dating app, trying to get dick in various countries that they fled to. On the right, you have, I don't want to say it, but you have the casualties of war. Seeing this photo, women clubbing, partying, trying to get dick down by dudes in Stockholm.
What did you want her to do?
Desperation.
Hold on. Loneliness and desperation. Okay, so
I didn't say loneliness.
okay, whatever. So, knowing that there are thousands or hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Ukrainian women who went to Stockholm and went to go fuck hot Swedish dudes, and they're on Tinder, and then comparing it to the other photo, does that change your view at all on this?
No, because although that they are victims to death, like obviously that's horrible, and I do believe that men still have the responsibility of protecting, but this is going back to, not to bring back to you, but it's like those women are now without a male figure. Now they probably have kids. They're desperate. They're trying to do. They go into sex work, or they're looking to survive. And now not only are they victims, but now the children are victims to just more brokenness and all this debauchery.
Are you sure you're not a feminist?
Ew, no.
Well, that's
Are you
very
sure?
that's a
Because
very
that's
guy.
not a
Hold on,
feminist.
hold
I
on,
was
hold on.
thinking that.
Hold on.
No, I don't.
It's
I feel.
wait,
I
stop,
feel,
stop.
okay.
Stop. Your view is a very gynocentric one. It's very woman-centered, woman-focused. How could it not be the case when I use the word primary, which has a meaning? How can it not be the case? Now, if I grant you that it would be absolutely devastating to, for example, a wife of a soldier, and that soldier died in war, if I grant you that it would be devastating to her and she would be hurt and distraught, couldn't you at least grant to me that dying is worse than being distraught and coping with the death of a loved one?
Yes, but I'm also not just looking at that. Look at the Palestine and Israel on both ends, all the kids and the mothers that are...
But let's keep it,
but that's still valid, right? That is still, they're still being victims to war that men
fine.
are...
I'll even argue this point. Even in the Israel-Palestine conflict, the men are still the primary victims of war, even in this conflict.
Well, I mean,
in
if
fact,
I could just...
the men are the primary victims of war in every single conflict.
But wait, hold on. But
the
then
men
you
are
hate
the
when
ones
people
who
say...
started. Women aren't out here declaring war.
But hold on. But you people that are like you, they like to argue that, oh, feminists are victims and like that victim mentality, right? So why can't you use that same logic with men? Like, isn't that your guys' duty to protect us women?
Is it wrong to say that somebody dying, they're not a victim?
They are a victim, but also what about the kids and the children that are also... Hold on,
no, let me address. Hold on. No, hold on. See, when...
No,
hold on, stop. So when feminists make... Stop. Everybody stop. Goddamn. Stop. Holy fuck. Jesus Christ. You guys are... Stop. Holy fuck. Let me talk. The reason feminists are criticized when it comes to their victimhood mindset, their victim mindset, is because they'll complain about things like manspreading and mansplaining and these sorts of benign and arbitrary things. Because the grievances, and granted, I do think there are actually legitimate grievances that women face. However, feminists will often they will either exaggerate or there will be a hyperbole. They'll present false information when it comes to their supposed victimhood status. And then they'll also just complain about just the most benign, ridiculous shit like the wage gap, mansplaining, manspreading. Okay? So that's where the criticisms come for.
Yeah.
So you can't then use that as justification to be like, well, why are you calling men victims when they fucking die in war? I apologize if I come off as a snowflake for holding the position that men dying in war makes them victims.
They are victims, but also, like, looking at it from a dark perspective, like, okay, they die and then it ends there. Now let's just hold on, wait. So with my church, there's a ministry where we go to Africa. Hold on, real quick. You're trying to leave?
Just say your point. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so there's a ministry at church where we go, well, I don't, but my church goes out to Africa and looks over the widows and the children that are left alone because the men have to go to war and they're just left in villages and they're left without food, they're left without everything. So if we're going to be approaching this from a traditional standpoint that that's their responsibility. I'm not saying they're not victims, but they are going to war to protect their women and children, and then okay, they die. It's horrible. I'm not saying that's right, but now the victims that are still living are the women and children that are having to... I don't agree with what these Ukrainian women are doing, but if anything, it just shows how much more broken they get without the male leader in the frame. You don't have to agree, though. I see what you're saying. They're victims. They're dying. That sucks. But the children in the rubble.
What about the woman?
The children and the women in the rubble right now, as we speak, those are victims that are still alive and breathing because of war.
Yes. Okay. So if I can acknowledge that war has a negative impact on children and women, I can acknowledge that. However, the men who are dying are the primary victims of war.
Yeah, but I think you're thinking I'm coming from a feminist point, but I'm actually making a point that men are much more, I can almost say more important than women, that they hold such a valuable value in the whole family unit that when they die, it impacts the family immensely.
Well, if they're more important than women, wouldn't their death be more important than the suffering of...
It makes much more of a
more
suffering.
treasured, yeah.
Because more people are being affected without their leadership and without their protection even more.
I know, the wife has to carry
Okay,
the kids
so
out.
hold on. Let me ask you a question. Let's assume that I don't know what the death toll is in the Ukraine conflict, but let's assume in World War II that 5 million of the men that died in World War II were single. They did not have a spouse. They did not have a wife. They did not have any children. Maybe they had a father, mother, brothers, sisters. I'll grant that. Knowing this, those 5 million men that didn't have a spouse, didn't have kids, are those men then the primary victim of war?
I guess in that situation, no.
Wait, even in that situation, still no.
Really?
No, I'm saying no, like no on my argument. Like no, wait, hold on. So if that for the situation you just gave me, no, then if there's no woman or children involved, then yeah, I guess the men are more victim in that situation.
Well, what about the father and the mother and brothers and sisters?
They have to deal
Aren't
with that
they going to
death.
suffer too?
So
I mean,
there's
just
a victim?
everybody freaking suffers. I don't know. This is like a hard question, but the thing is, you think that you guys just think straight out it's the men are more victims and that
Yeah,
than
they're the
the,
ones
Yes,
fighting.
every
They're
military
dying.
conflict,
Sacrificing
every
their
military
lives.
but there
conflict.
there is all there are also women
They know
that
there's
are
a
Yes.
chance that
more.
they'll never come back to their
Yes.
families. So yeah,
Yeah,
Hold
and,
on.
and
Wait,
there's
wait,
a domino
wait.
effect, but there's a
to go
domino
sometimes.
effect
Well,
from
then
that.
I'll make a deal with you. How about women go and fight all the wars and men stay at home, and then we
Hell
can
no.
say that we're equally
No, I'm not for
victims to
that.
you?
I'm not for that. I believe that men should be out fighting the war, and it's unfortunate
have
that
to.
I have a
they are
message
the
for you
ones
that's
that
coming
are
through.
being
There's a
victims
message.
to
Yeah, I
it.
know, but
And
let's
there's
assume
a
for, hang on, let
repercussion
us
in
assume for a second
society as
women
well.
hang on, but let us assume for a second women were the ones out fighting the wars while men stayed home.
We'd be so messed
Would
up.
you? Yeah, would you say though that women or men then would be the primary victim of war?
This is crazy.
Okay, wait. So if all women were out in war,
would we be
If the women
victims?
fought the wars instead of the men and the men stayed home, would you say that?
no.
Then
I think the
that
women now
that
would
the
be
women,
the women
Yeah,
would be
would
the
the
victim
women
because
be
the
the
men can
primary
figure it
victims of
out.
war?
They're leaders. They'll be back home figuring
Yeah,
things
but they're
out.
gonna
I
have a
don't think.
leadership role if they're not fighting.
Hold on.
Well, that, I know. I don't agree with that, but we're just giving the circumstance. If we were to switch it for whatever reason, then yeah, no.
Wait,
would
so
the women then be the primary victims of war?
Still,
If they were out, yes, because I believe that men could be at home figuring it out. I don't
So
believe
then-
they should be
so then
staying at
if
home.
women were the primary victims of war in that scenario, then if you reversed it to men,
Yeah,
then
because
men
we'd be
should
so
the
messed up,
primary
women would
victims
be
of
so
war. You
weak.
see how that works?
No. Because if we were, it'd be a lose-lose situation that way. Because if all women were to go to war, we'd be messed up. And if the men were just had to stay back home, no. Like I don't believe that would work.
I don't know if this is making sense logically to me, but
maybe
Okay,
it's just
so
late.
so here, let me make it make sense. If by your answer you
I
say
have
if
something
women went to war
I got something
instead
good.
of men, they'd be the primary victims of war. But you say when men go to war instead of women, they're not the primary victims of war. That makes no fucking sense to me at all.
Well, I can't. That logic doesn't stand because I'm thinking that men should be going out to war because they are supposed to be protecting us and stuff like that. And if we were to switch it, I still in my head I'm like, well, they will figure it out. They're leaders and stuff. So, but if they're back at home and their wife is dead, but the logic doesn't work because real leaders wouldn't be in that position anyways. They'd be out in war.
I actually have. I think I have a something here, Andrew. Unless you want to have a bit more.
Well, I mean, I'll just finish it with this. So the insertion of the hypothetical is to test the logic, right? So if you're asking who's the primary victim of war, if we just reversed it and said, well, women go to war instead of men, and you say that women then would be the primary victims of war,
No.
then it should stand to logic that if you reversed it so men went, that men would be the primary victims of war.
No.
You understand that, right?
No, I understand what you're saying, but no, because my argument is that because. Go ahead, Brian.
I think I have a smoking gun here.
All right,
and
go
Andrew,
ahead,
I want
fire it
you to
out.
let me know if you think this is a little smoking gun. I asked you a question earlier, and I think I asked, would you rather be essayed or killed, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, oh boy, okay.
I think I know where you're going
hold
with
on.
this, but-
So, if you were to be essayed, are you the primary victim, or is your husband the primary victim?
Because he has to deal with you dealing with that trauma.
I mean, but that's not the same thing. Those are two different scenarios because both people are
Yeah,
still alive.
we agreed. They're two different scenarios, but in good faith,
Okay.
are you the primary victim or is he?
I think I would be the primary victim.
Right, you'd be the primary victim.
Now, but here's the thing. When I asked you the question, my understanding is you categorize this, death is worse than SA.
Death is worse.
You
than
said- you said you
I
would
just don't want to
rather-
die. I've been sexually assaulted, so I'm okay with that.
But so you said that death is worse than SA.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just
That's-
choosing.
That's what
I,
we said.
But we've already been.
no, I did not say that.
But
I
if-
did not
if-
say that.
But we have to choose. Like,
But
which
you-
one.
But
had
it's
to
not because
choose.
I think it's better. It's just I already done it, so I'm alive right now. Why would I want to die?
That's what I'm saying. Because you wouldn't want
But
to.
if, hold on, I'm a little confused here.
Okay, so if presented with the choice between SA or death, if you had never been SA'd, which would you choose?
Well, it's hard because I'm biased. I'm SA. Because
Yeah, but assuming that
okay,
you
SA.
weren't.
SA.
Well, you already
Yeah,
answered
SA,
that.
okay, SA. So then if that's the case, under those conditionals, then you're saying that death is worse. And if women are the primary victims of war based around the fact that they could potentially be SA'd, and death is worse and more men die than women, then it would stand to reason then that men were the primary victims of war. Is that not the argument, Brian?
No, because I'm still standing on that. The fact that the men are dying is affecting and having a domino effect on the women and the children left behind.
So the people that are dying aren't victims.
They are victims, but I don't believe that the primary because they're dead and it sucks. But now the people that are living with the consequences are the women and the children.
Got it. Okay.
They're dying, so the
let's
women and
test,
children-
So just real quick, we'll test
Think
that
about
too.
all the single moms
Hang
with
on, hang on,
children.
hang on. Would you choose abandonment or choose death?
Abandonment.
Okay. Would you choose poor economic conditions or would you choose death?
Poor economic conditions.
Okay, well then under all circumstances which you have stated that the domino effect would fall on the women and children, then this means that men who die in war still have it worse than women. Therefore, we can conclude that men have it worse than women when it comes to war, correct?
I guess. Yes.
Okay.